It was a night that changed my life forever, and it all started with a simple traffic stop. Or so I thought. I was just a regular guy, driving home after a long shift, my mind already drifting to the comfort of my couch. But that night, the universe had other plans for me. The streetlights flickered as I cruised down the empty road. Everything felt normal, until I saw it. The headlights behind me, too close, too bright. At first, I thought nothing of it. But then, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights filled my rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat. What did I do? Was I speeding? I pulled over, trying to stay calm, but something didn't feel right. A simple traffic stop turned into something much darker. And that was only the beginning. James Miller wasn't anyone special. Just an ordinary guy with a job, a home, and the daily grind of life. He was always the reliable one, the one who showed up, put in the work, and kept his head down. But tonight, James was exhausted. After a long, draining day at the office, he was counting down the minutes until he could sink into the familiar comfort of his couch. It was late, the clock read 9:47 p.m., and the road ahead was quiet, too quiet. The kind of stillness that felt almost unnatural. The streetlights above cast long shadows on the sidewalks, but their glow was dim, as if they were fighting to stay alive in the darkness. There was something eerie about it. James had just left work, dressed in his usual button-up shirt and slacks, when he noticed it. A car behind him, just a little too close. He couldn't see the driver, but the headlights were blinding in his rearview mirror. He tried to shake it off, but the car stayed there, uncomfortably close, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. He shifted in his seat, his mind starting to race. Was something wrong? Or was it just his imagination? Then, without warning, the red and blue lights lit up the night, pulling him from his thoughts and setting the stage for everything to change. The headlights behind James grew brighter, and his pulse quickened. He glanced in the rearview mirror, only to see the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights. With a sigh, he pulled over to the side of the empty street, his mind racing with questions. Was he speeding? Was something wrong with his car? Before he could settle his nerves, two officers approached his vehicle. Sergeant Ryan Harris, the older of the two, leaned down to James' window, his face hard and unreadable. His uniform was crisp, but the way he carried himself suggested authority that bordered on aggression. License and registration, Harris demanded, his voice sharp. James, trying to keep calm, handed them over, but Harris wasn't done. Where are you coming from? He asked, his eyes narrowing as he scanned James with suspicion. What's in the trunk? James felt a knot form in his stomach. Just some work stuff. Nothing special. He hadn't expected this line of questioning. Before James could even respond, Officer Leo Randall, the younger officer, was already walking around to the trunk. I'm going to have to check it, he muttered. For safety. Wait, what? I didn't consent to any search, James protested, panic rising in his chest. But Randall didn't listen. With a practiced motion, he popped the trunk, revealing a bag James had never seen before. His heart sank. What's this? Harris barked as he pulled out the bag. The contents were obscured by the shadows, but it didn't matter. James was stunned. He had no idea how it got there. It wasn't his, and he couldn't fathom why it was there. Looks like something we should take a closer look at, Harris said, his voice dripping with suspicion. He stepped back, motioning for Randall to come closer. James' confusion turned to panic. I don't know what that is. I've never seen that bag before in my life. Without warning, Harris reached for James and yanked him out of the car. Shut up, he snapped, twisting James' arms behind his back. You're coming with us. The officers didn't explain anything. They didn't offer any clarity. All James knew was that something was horribly wrong, and they weren't giving him a chance to explain himself. A quiet, yet chilling voice came from Harris as he pressed James to the ground. You're not from around here, are you? That was the first hint of something darker at play, something James couldn't yet grasp but could feel in his bones. The ride to the station was suffocating. The cramped back seat felt like it was closing in on James as Sergeant Harris and Officer Randall exchanged whispers in the front. He couldn't make out their words, but the occasional chuckle sent shivers down his spine. They didn't seem like they were in any hurry to get him to the station, as if enjoying the tension they'd created. James shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the heat of their stares burning into the back of his neck. He wanted to scream, to demand they tell him what was going on, but something told him that wouldn't make things better. "What's this about?" James finally managed, his voice trembling. Harris turned his head slightly, his lips curling into a smirk. "You'll find out soon enough." The implication hung in the air, thick with menace. Randall's snicker only made the situation worse. When they arrived at the station, James was roughly shoved out of the car and into a sterile, cold interrogation room. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the walls felt as though they were closing in on him. The small, metal table between him and the officers felt like a barrier that separated him from any sense of justice. Before he could say a word, Harris slammed a manila folder onto the table with a loud thud. "Bank robbery," he said matter-of-factly. "We know you were involved." James blinked, his mind racing. "What?" "That's no. I haven't." Harris cut him off. "We've got the evidence right here." He opened the folder to reveal a photo of the bag from the trunk. Inside, it was filled with cash, along with a handgun, the exact items James had never seen before. "Where's the money, James?" Randall asked, his voice dripping with accusation. "I don't know anything about this." James shouted, panic rising in his chest. "This is a mistake." But they didn't care. Harris stood, walking around the table with slow, deliberate steps. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. But we know you did it. We have the evidence. You'll talk sooner or later." James fought to keep his composure. He wasn't guilty of anything, and he couldn't let them break him. But as the officers closed in on him, he could feel the weight of their words, the pressure mounting with every passing second. This wasn't just about a robbery. This was about power, manipulation, and a system that was all too ready to punish him. The media storm surrounding James' case was like nothing he had ever experienced. Headlines screamed his name, plastering his face all over every major news outlet. "Bank robber on the loose," the news anchor shouted, as if his entire life had been reduced to a headline. It didn't matter that the evidence was fabricated, James was guilty in the eyes of the public. The constant media attention made every moment feel like an accusation, a weight pressing down on him, amplifying the terror that already gripped his heart. The day of the trial finally arrived. James sat in the courtroom, dressed in a worn-out suit, his hands trembling as he anxiously awaited the start. The courtroom was filled with spectators, reporters, and the kind of cold, sterile atmosphere that made him feel like a criminal, even though he was innocent. The prosecutor stood up and confidently presented the case against James. He cited the fingerprints found on the bag, the supposed evidence that tied him to the crime, and the lies they had fed the public. It was all so neatly packaged, so convincing, that even James began to wonder if he might have missed something. Then came his lawyer. Thomas, a man with too many bags under his eyes and a posture that suggested uncertainty, shuffled papers in front of him, clearly unprepared for the battle ahead. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thomas began, his voice faltering. "This is, my client, James Miller." The hesitation in his voice didn't reassure James. If anything, it amplified his loneliness, as though no one in that room really believed him. Thomas didn't stand a chance. Harris and Randall were ruthless on the stand, painting a picture of a man who had carefully orchestrated a bank robbery, a dangerous criminal who had evaded the law for far too long. Every word they spoke made James look more and more guilty, their testimonies laced with lies that only dug the hole deeper for him. He tried to hold on to some shred of hope, but the sinking feeling in his chest told him this wasn't going to end well. But then, just as the prosecutor seemed to be winning the case, something shifted. Thomas, despite his hesitation, brought out a critical piece of evidence. "Your Honor, we have time-stamped footage from James Miller's workplace, proving he was there at the time of the robbery." The video showed James walking into his office, clocking in for his shift, and working steadily until the robbery supposedly took place. It wasn't much, but it was something. A glimmer of hope in the dark, like a single light at the end of a tunnel. Maybe there was a way out of this after all. The trial seemed to drag on, each day feeling more like a nightmare than reality. The pressure was unbearable, and James' nerves were frayed. Then, just as the case was nearing its most critical point, James' lawyer Thomas uncovered something that would shake the entire foundation of the trial. The courthouse fell silent as the screen behind Thomas flashed with new footage. It was from a traffic camera, clear as day. The footage showed Officer Randall, in full uniform, pulling up to James' car. But that wasn't the shocking part. What sent a ripple of disbelief through the courtroom was the image of Randall walking toward James' vehicle, opening the trunk, and placing the bag of cash and the gun inside. It was undeniable, irrefutable. The officers had planted the evidence, and the entire case was a setup from the very beginning. The gasps in the courtroom were deafening. The judge, the jury, even the spectators, all were frozen, eyes glued to the screen, watching as the video played out. Randall's face was captured in perfect clarity, his every move methodical and calm as he executed the planting of the evidence. For the first time since the trial began, James felt like he could breathe again. But Sergeant Harris wasn't about to let the truth derail his lies so easily. He shot up from his seat, his face flushed with panic. "This is a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking. "That footage is doctored." But even as he tried to dismiss the footage, the panic in his eyes was impossible to hide. The damage had been done. The courtroom was in chaos, with murmurs spreading like wildfire. Harris's attempt to save face only made his guilt more apparent. He couldn't hide behind lies anymore. And then, in a move that stunned everyone, James stood up. With a calmness that belied the chaos of the moment, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his badge. Not the badge of a regular citizen, but the badge of someone much more significant, a CIA badge. The room went completely still, every eye locked on James, unsure of what was happening. "My name is James Miller," he said in a steady voice, "and I've been conducting a covert investigation into police corruption." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Harris and Randall's faces drained of color as the full weight of James' words hit them. They had been caught, not just in a lie, but in a massive, systemic corruption that went far beyond a simple frame job. The judge didn't hesitate. He slammed his gavel down, ordering the immediate detention of both officers for perjury and evidence tampering. Harris and Randall were arrested on the spot, their faces betraying the shock and fear they had tried to mask for so long. They had thought they could control the narrative, but in that moment, they were exposed for who they truly were. As the gavel slammed down, the tension in the courtroom finally began to ease. The court orders the immediate arrest of officers Harris and Randall for perjury, evidence tampering, and misconduct, the judge declared. James felt the weight lift off his shoulders as the officers were led away in cuffs, their faces a mask of disbelief. The very people who had tried to frame him, to tear apart his life, were now the ones being dragged out in shame. Their careers, once proud and powerful, had been shattered in an instant. The media outside had already caught wind of the verdict, and cameras flashed in a frenzy as the officers were escorted into police vehicles. For the first time in what felt like forever, James could breathe freely. But even in his victory, the sting of injustice lingered. As James turned to face the judge, he heard the words he had hoped for, but still felt hollow. "The court apologizes for the miscarriage of justice," the judge said, his voice measured but sincere. "You should never have been put in this position." The apology was welcome, but it couldn't undo the damage. The systemic flaws that had allowed this to happen were still in place. The injustice wasn't over, it was just a momentary triumph. James stood tall, but his calm resolve said everything. "This is just one battle," he thought to himself. "There's still a long road ahead." The fight against corruption and racial injustice wasn't over, this was just the beginning. Today, he had won. But tomorrow, the battle would continue. And he would be ready. As James left the courthouse, he felt the weight of the moment settle in. Justice had been served, but it wasn't enough to fix everything. The system, broken and corrupt, hadn't been repaired by this single victory. It had only been exposed for what it truly was, unjust, biased, and deeply flawed. But today, for the first time in a long while, James had been given his freedom back, not just for himself, but for everyone who had suffered under the same unfair system. He walked through the courthouse doors, the bright light of day hitting his face, and couldn't shake the reality of what he'd been through. He had fought for his life, but what about the others who had no voice? What about those still trapped under the weight of racial prejudice and inequality? The fight wasn't over, and James knew that. His story, though hard-fought, was just one drop in the ocean of a much larger battle. But today, the message was clear: standing up, speaking out, and fighting back could make a difference. It was a reminder to all of us that injustice thrives when we remain silent, and only by challenging the system can we hope for change. Now, it was up to the audience to keep this story alive. To remember the faces of Harris and Randall and never forget the real victims of this kind of systemic racism. The courtroom victory was just the beginning of a larger fight. Racism and corruption are deep-rooted problems that cannot be solved with a single case. James' story is a reminder of the ongoing struggle for justice and the power of standing up against discrimination. While today justice prevailed, we must all recognize that this battle will continue, and it's up to all of us to push for systemic change. This fight isn't over, and each of us has a role to play in breaking down these barriers. So, let's not turn a blind eye to the injustices we see. Let's use our voices, our actions, and our power to make a difference. What do you think about James' story? Have you experienced or witnessed racial injustice in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in the power of standing up for what's right, share this video to spread the word. Together, we can help change the world, one voice at a time.